In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Veni Sancti Spiritus, repletuorum cola fidelium, et tui amoris in ne sine macende, emite spiritum tuum creabuntor.
Et nobis faciem terre.
Oremus Deus quibere fidelium Sancti Spiritus, illustratione locuisti. Da nobis in eadem spiritu rectus sapere, et eis emugat celestum gaudere. Per Christum Dominum nostrum.
Amen.
Cor Mariae Immaculatum.
Ora pro nobis.
Sancte Petre Damiane.
Ora pro
In
nobis.
nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Born of revolution. The whole new mass and liturgical changes. We're seeing more and more that it's just an outright assault to destroy the Catholic Church from within and from without. So for the Church to rise out of all this will definitely prove she's divine. If she comes out of this shining, only a divine church could survive this attack on the inside and outside, the way it's going. Okay, let's pick up the third paragraph, page Roman numeral 3. We're in the introduction. Pick it up now at a suitable distance in time, Michael.
Now, at a suitable distance in time, we can look back and see that virtually all Catholics who lived through this period could never have conceived that a liturgical tsunami was heading for the shores of the Church. That is because its course was being plotted by the Commission for the General Reform of the Liturgy, established in 1946. Its members, appointed by Pope Pius XII in 1948, conducted their business in the uttermost secrecy, so that when the Congregation of Rites revealed the full extent of the Holy Week reforms in 1955, the faithful were taken by surprise. In other words, few people in the 1950s and early 60s knew what was coming until it was too late, and they found themselves defenseless, caught, as it were, between the devil and the deep blue sea, while the tide of innovations swept onward unchecked. It is a fact of physics that the deeper the water, the faster the waves travel. And, by analogy, these were very deep waters indeed. There has never been a deeper, faster reform in the history of the liturgy than that brought about in the 13 years between 1956 and 1969, the year when the rapidly advancing wave burst with full force on the unsuspecting faithful with the imposition of the new Mass.
Okay, well said. Very well said. So we're looking at the aftermath of this whole revolution. And it's a continued revolution with destruction. Now they're selling off churches. And then most dioceses are going bankrupt because of the corrupt clergy. It's, a Catholic really needs faith today. Because humanly speaking, the church is in shambles. But she's also divine. It's the Conciliar church is this disease. The Catholic Church continues in the tradition. Anthony, how has it been so easy?
How has it been so easy for the reformers to mount such an assault on the way Catholics have been worshiping for centuries? The triumph of the liturgical revolution they brought about was, like the progress of a tsunami, preceded by a relatively quiet period when little or no danger was perceived to the established order. We have to go back to the early part of the 20th century to see that the first stirrings of revolt against the traditional liturgy took place in Benedictine monasteries, the abbeys of Mont César in Belgium, Maria Laach in Germany, and St. John's Abbey in Minnesota.
Okay. St. John's Abbey in Minnesota, there are pictures of table blocks that they were saying the new Mass on in the 40s. Same with St. Mary's, Kansas. Father Gerard Ellis, who's buried at the St. Mary's Jesuit Cemetery. He wrote a book, The Mass of the Future, and in there you can see pictures. They're experimenting with Mass facing the people. This is in the 40s. That was against the law. That was against all obedience under Pius XII. But there they were, playing with the Mass. And they were telling the college students, just be patient. This is what's coming around the corner. The church is finally going to get with it. With what? Go on.
In these relatively secluded places, safe from prying eyes, experimentation was conducted in active participation of the laity in the liturgy. This involved dialogue mass, mass facing the people, vernacular responses, congregational singing, an offertory procession, etc. in the 1920s and earlier. The early liturgical movement was localized and sporadic and remained underground until after the Second World War, when individual malcontents began to coalesce into groups around newly formed Sunday weeks, bishops' conferences, liturgical centuries, national and international congresses, and publishing houses, all with specific agendas for change. By the mid-1950s, the progressive current was running fast and strong. What went unnoticed by most of the world's Catholics was the cumulative propelling force building up behind the cresting wave. This packed enough energy to wipe out cherished traditions in a matter of moments and topple bastions, which had stood for centuries. From this, we can deduce that the seismic force of the onslaught was proportionate to the strength of passion felt by the reformers against the traditional liturgy.
Yes, we will raise the bastions, said one of the modernists. It might have been Ratzinger. We will raise, that is, level out, destroy, like Israel's done to Gaza and what's Zelensky did to Ukraine. Just level it out. Raise the bastions. What are the bastions they're talking about? The traditional catechism, the traditional mass, traditional sacraments, the theology. Just destroy it. And Ratzinger was right in there. He's not this conservative, nice guy. That's so false. All right, go on.
Yet, in the early stages of the liturgical revolution, Popes Pius XII and John XXIII adopted, in varying degrees, a conciliatory approach to most of the demands of liturgical reformers, and even conferred on some of them positions of great power and influence.
Okay, name one.
Annibale Bernini.
Yes. Go on.
Their appeasement turned into a standing threat to established traditions, leaving the sheep of the flock increasingly unprotected against the wolves. What this suggests is a Machiavellian concept of government by popes, who alone had supreme authority over the liturgy and could have saved tradition, yet seemed oblivious to the distinction between power and principle. Ample documentary evidence exists and is provided throughout the course of this study to prove that the liturgical reforms they authorized were broadly based on behind-the-scenes collusion, deceit, and manipulation, a fact that must necessarily cast serious doubt on the legitimacy of the legislation by which their policies were enacted. This becomes more obvious when we consider that the effect of these policies was to deprive the faithful of their full spiritual patrimony to the detriment of the Church. We can conclude that, with reference to the Roman Missal, it was Popes Pius XII and John XXIII, and not, as is commonly assumed, Paul VI, who introduced the faithful to their first experience of revolution.
Yeah, that goes way back, right? And I'm convinced, and I think Frere Michel is too, who wrote the 3 volumes of the history of Fatima, that because Pius XII did not cooperate with heaven's demands to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, revealed the third secret before 1960, he also was the one that punished Padre Pio. He silenced Sister Lucia. That was him. Or someone he gave delegation to. So I think Pius XII, he was supposed to be the great Pope of Fatima, but he never listened to Our Lady, and he had many graces, personal graces, like 5 or 6 times where he saw, in a special ecstasy from heaven, he saw the third secret of, he saw the miracle of the sun a few times, and he had many graces to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart with all the bishops. The most he did was do a little private ceremony of some little consecration with a group of Russian people visiting him in a private audience. But that's not what Our Lady asked. Why can't they get this straight? The Virgin Mary didn't speak Chinese. And then Pope Francis, I was surprised Bishop Fillet acknowledged it. And even Father Pfeiffer acknowledged Pope Francis' consecration to the Immaculate Heart as the one fulfilling the request of Our Lady. But he made a mockery of it. He didn't say Russia, he said Ukraine, Lithuania, and he used all this humanitarian language. That wasn't what Our Lady asked. So, when it's done correctly, miracles will happen. But, all right. Go on, Guadalupe, loud and clear.
The question as to what caused the tectonic plates to shift in the first place, or what could have triggered so convulsive and baneful a transformation of the ancient liturgy, has never been asked with any seriousness. Yet the answer, active participation of the laity, was already known by the progressivists from the time it was first used by Dom Lambert Baudouin in 1909 to inaugurate the liturgical movement.
Okay, what year was the Sion condemned by Pius X?
1910.
Yeah, so it's all around that time, right? Go on.
They, if no one else at the time, could see its destructive potential to Protestantize the liturgy by reconfiguring the role of the priest as simply another actor in the collective celebration of the Mass.
Okay, doesn't that fit Sionist ideas? The priest is just another one of us, one of the comrades. And we, the assembly, offer with the priest the sacrifice of praise. And this is 1909, 1910. Go on.
The traditional arrangement whereby the priest said the Mass and the people heard it was considered exploitative, designed to deny the faithful their right to have an active role in the Mass, and to keep them in a subordinate position to the priest. It may have started with the collective vocal responses of the laity, the so-called dialogue Mass, but that was only a prototype of the complete revolution to come, in which the role of the priest is downgraded, and would eventually be absorbed into the general active participation of the assembly. After so much moving and shaking in the liturgy, most modern Catholics today actually believe, because they have had it drummed into them by the Novus Ordo priests, that the Mass would have no meaning without their vocal responses and other activity-based performances in it.
Yeah, is that not true? Do most people think that the Mass automatically requires the active participation of the laity?
Yes.
Responding. I mean, it's built into the new Mass. So how do you get from no participation, except the most important one, internal, to only and almost exclusively external participation? How do you bridge that gap? Of Catholics used to go into Mass silent, praying, interior devotion, and following what the priest says in their missal, to active clapping, responding. What will bridge that gap? And it has to be the dialogue Mass, which was approved by Pius XII. I think Pius XII lost a lot of graces because he didn't cooperate with Our Lady of Fatima. And part of that was the blindness. And he himself said, because it seems he read the third secret, he himself said that the third secret mentioned something about altering the liturgy, changing the liturgy. And it only came out of him, and he was one of the few that read the third secret. And he should have revealed it, but so from that we know that the third secret must mention the revolution of the Mass. It'll be replaced by this Protestant service.
I think Pius XII, I know which quote you're talking about, Father. I think he also says that there are men in my presence, speaking about the people who surround him,
Mm-hmm.
that have the intention of changing the liturgy. Basically, that's what he says.
Mm-hmm. Well, here it is. We're studying it right here. All right, go on.
The new Cartesian principle.
Cartesian. That's Descartes. That's a word from Cartesian. Descartes, René Descartes, the rotten philosopher from France in the 1600s, with his principle cogito ergo sum, which means
I think, therefore I am.
Yeah, that's a perverse philosophy, right? I think, therefore I exist. He's got it backwards. The truth is,
It's sum ergo cogito. I am, therefore I think.
yeah, I exist, therefore I can think. All right? But she's applying that to this. Dialogo ergo sum. I dialogue, therefore I'm at Mass. Go ahead.
Whereby dialogue is the updated form of the cogito that proves the sum. I dialogue, therefore I am a Novus Ordo Catholic. What may come across as an ontological joke was meant in deadly earnest. It is precisely the ontological status of the ordained priest which allows him to perform supernatural actions in the Mass and sacraments that has been
Impugned.
by progressive reformers who set out to blur the distinction between the clerical and lay states. They achieved their goal principally through the imposition of active participation of everyone in the liturgy. But the true identity of the Catholic priest, indelible and everlasting, is upheld integrally in the traditional liturgy, even if the pool of contemporary tides tries to make it appear otherwise. It is now considered acceptable to denounce those who wish to preserve the traditional liturgy as extremists, fanatical, and even schismatic. But there is nothing remotely extremist about attempting to preserve our common spiritual patrimony from annihilation, or schismatic about wanting the Church to preserve its own traditions. These were, after all, traditional aspirations upheld by the Church from its foundation to the onset of the liturgical movement.
Revolution.
Liturgical revolution. It was only then that the Church leaders, including popes, stopped defending tradition and started punishing those who tried to uphold it, while taking the side of dissident liturgists against them. A revolution such as that witnessed by mid-20th century Catholics can only be truly understood and remembered in the context of the traditions that it destroyed. All the evidence indicates that the creation of the new Mass of 1969 was dependent on a long concatenation of prior events that had been unfolding in historical continuity from the early years of the 20th century. We can call this the gestation period of the mutant Novus Ordo liturgy, which was born of the Revolution. It is these prior events, many of which are still within living memory of the older generation of today's Catholics, that will form the subject matter of this study.
Okay, 1. Active participation, the background. We will begin this study with the theme of active participation. As a catchphrase, it rose to prominence in the Church within the liturgical movement in the 20th century. As activity had never been a defining characteristic of lay participation at Mass throughout the Church's history, some explanation is needed as to why it suddenly acquired iconic status in the middle of the 20th century, and how it came to have a far-reaching effect in the church. The butterfly effect. We do not need to believe in the famous adage that a butterfly can flap its wings in Brazil and set off for a tornado in Texas. To be convinced of the power of the single word active to produce a similar result in the church. Although some progressive reformers had been implementing lay so-called active participation in the liturgy from 1909, it was only when Vatican II's liturgical constitution, 1963, promoted it as the primary goal of the liturgy. The aim to be achieved before all else. Footnote Sacrosanctum Concilium, paragraph 14. The aim to be achieved before all else. What? Aim. What's the aim?
Active participation.
And what's Sacrosanctum Concilium?
The document in Vatican II concerning the liturgy.
Yeah, right out of, it's the document of Vatican II on the liturgy. So all the poison's built right into the text. Even before the invention of the internet, within a short time it achieved viral status. Oh, sorry, let me finish that sentence. That this hitherto relatively unknown quantity ricocheted around the world. Even before the invention of the internet, within a short time it achieved viral status. The expression, active participation, was on the lips of all liturgical reformers throughout the church, soon becoming etched into the collective imagination as a defining characteristic of the reform. This infatuation with active participation proved itself to be boundless. No aspect of the liturgy was immune to its influence for all the reformers, including those of Pope Pius XII in the 1950s, were specifically devised with the active participation of the faithful in mind. One could say that the liturgical reform has active participation running through it like the letters in a stick of rock. Footnote, a stick of rock is a familiar expression to British people and is associated with seaside resorts such as Blackpool, Brighton, etc. It is a long cylindrical piece of confectionery, usually peppermint flavor, with the name of the town stamped throughout its length. In Graham Greene's novel, Brighton Rock, the character Ida says, "It's like those sticks of rock. Bite it all the way down, you'll still read Brighton." Okay, so this is some, she lives, she's an old lady now in England. I think she's up by Liverpool area. And I wrote her an email and so forth and so forth. And anyway, I'd like to visit her sometime. So anyway, it permeates all the reforms, this so-called active participation. In treating the main points of this new principle, which revolutionized the whole liturgical life, we will be addressing the following questions. Where did the expression come from? What was its precise meaning? Was it really necessary? What effects did it produce? A phrase of dubious provenance. Michael?
Ever since the early years of the 20th century, active participation has taken on a life of its own and continues to be reinforced with a zeal surpassed only by the hostility of the reformers to the traditional liturgy. Yet no one seems to have ever raised the question as to who actually coined the corresponding Latin phrase.
Participatio actuosa.
And invested it with meaning. It says something about the standards of reliability in the liturgical movement that everyone took it for granted that the Latin word actuosa came from the pen of Pope Pius X, without making any serious effort to investigate the truth of the claim. Such insouciance about authenticity of provenance would not be considered acceptable in the world of fine arts, archaeology, commerce, scientific experiments, and many other areas of public life. for provenance is the determining factor in distinguishing between what is genuine and what is fake, and in deciding that information is to be trusted.
Just saying, what information is to be trusted? Go on.
Who would give a large sum of money to a dodgy dealer in the antiquities market for an artifact with no identifiable origin? So why should we entrust the infinitely greater value of our souls to the machinations of liturgical reformers, when many of their ideas have been exposed by modern researchers as based on fiction? As for the expression active participation, when we consider the question of the authenticity of its provenance, we touch on the moral issue of the reform, which includes honesty and integrity. Did Pius X actually use the word actuosa, active, or did he not? If he did, where is the document that records it? True, the Italian version of Pius IX's 1903 motu proprio, Pius X's 1903 motu proprio, tra le solecitudini, TLS, did contain the word attiva, active, in connection with lay participation in the liturgy. Nevertheless, the only authentic and authoritative document that faithfully reproduces the Pope's words is the Latin version, and an attentive reading of that document would show that the word actuosa is entirely missing.
So in the in the Italian translation, somebody added the word actuosa. It didn't exist in the Latin original document of Pius X. So some little weasel added one deadly word. And we know the power of words, right? Just the Greek words homoousion and homoousion, that whole battle with the Arian heresy. Here, some sneak put in actuosa, which would trigger a tsunami, literally. Read on, Anthony.
As with the dog in the Sherlock Holmes story.
Okay, footnote, The Adventure of Silver Blaze, a story by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, in which Holmes investigates the disappearance of the eponymous racehorse and the apparent murder of its trainer. Sherlock Holmes grasped the significance of the guard dog's silence, for the midnight visitor was one the dog knew well. And as he explained, quote, one true inference invariably suggests others. He soon unraveled the mystery. So start over.
As with the dog in the Sherlock Holmes story, who didn't bark in the night, the absence of actuosa in the document provides us with a significant clue. We cannot avoid the logical conclusion that it was not there because it was not meant to be there. And it was not meant to be there because it did not fit with the traditional manner in which the liturgy was conducted. In the culture of Catholic worship, it was customary to describe the faithful as assisting at Mass, understood as being present at the Holy Sacrifice, hearing Mass in silence while the priest said the Mass, or receiving the sacraments at the hands of the priest who administered them to the faithful. There was no question of the laity having the duty and responsibility actively to perform these ceremonies along with or in place of the priest. That concept, however, was something entirely new in the Church, and has all the characteristics of a mutant gene that has altered some of the material it received from its parent, thus causing it to malfunction. Yet, it was adopted officially as the new paradigm for Catholic worship in 1969 to be applied universally in the Novus Ordo liturgy.
Okay, very, very interesting, isn't it? Contextual evidence, go on.
Concerning the Latin version of Pius X's motu proprio, let it not be thought that evidence of absence alone is the only argument being adduced to demonstrate that it did not contain the word actuosa. Another factor which is equally important, if not more so, is the contextual evidence of the document. In the wider context, Pius X never mentioned Aciosa in connection with lay participation in the liturgy in any document he had written on sacred music before he became Pope, nor, for that matter, did his predecessor, Pope Leo XIII, during his papacy. Indeed, such a concept was never mentioned in any previous papal document going back in history to the earliest centuries. If we examine the major documents on the liturgy issued by Pius X, anterior to his pontificate, one fact imposes itself. Active participation was never part of his lexicon. We can show by means of these texts the continuity and remarkable consistency of his thought on the liturgy.
So we have 3 points. Point 1.
In 1888, when he was Bishop of Mantua, he held a synod which issued various decrees on pastoral topics, including the liturgy. The decrees on sacred music concerned Gregorian chant, the use of musical instruments, the choice of organ music, the training of seminarians, and the exclusion of women from church choirs. The topic of active participation was entirely absent.
Next point.
In 1893, as Cardinal Patriarch of Venice, he sent a detailed report called a votum to the Sacred Congregation of Rites after Pope Leo XIII organized a conference on Gregorian chant and issued a papal questionnaire. In the votum, he set out the Church's official teaching on sacred music. This basically followed the principles of Pope Leo's earlier document, Ordinatio quod Sacram Musicam, on sacred music issued in 1884. The records plainly show that in their respective documents, neither Pope nor Cardinal alluded to, quote-unquote, active participation.
So this term, active participation, never had a precedent in church documents. Since suddenly it appears in a Latin mistranslation from Pius X's own encyclical, or his letter, there's something very fishy, right? Next and last.
In 1895, he issued a pastoral letter on sacred music. It is virtually a reprise of his earlier theme, as it reiterates all the points set out in the 1888 Synod and the 1893 Votum. Again, there is no mention of active participation. In 1903, he issued his Motu Proprio, the Latin text of which was virtually identical to the above-mentioned decrees, and, like them, made no mention of active participation. This is hardly surprising, since Pope Pius X was following the prescriptions of the Council of Trent, which did not mention it either. The discrepancy between the two documents, the vernacular and the Latin versions, is not insignificant, for the word active and its equivalent in the various vernaculars would determine the outcome of the whole liturgical reform, whereas the Latin version, which lacked any equivalent reference, simply preserved and fostered tradition.
Footnote, Pope Pius X in 1903, Motu Proprio, paragraph 25, quote, "Let the above-mentioned traditional Gregorian chant be cultivated by all with diligence and love, according to the Tridentine prescriptions." So, yeah, active participation was a novelty. It never was a word used in the church documents. So how did it pop up all of a sudden? Who put the active into participation? Guadalupe, loud and clear.
It is only the Italian version, which lacks the authoritative status of the Latin version, that the expression partecipazione attiva made its sudden and unexpected eruption. One theory of how the Italian phrase partecipazione attiva, active participation, found its way into the Tra le Sollecitudini is that it could have been inserted by the person who actually drew up the text, the Vatican museologist, Father Angelo De Santi, of the Society of Jesus, who had been closely associated with the Pope's musical reforms when the latter was Bishop of Mantua and Patriarch of Venice. This is a distinct possibility, considering that Father De Santi was known to have used this expression in articles he had written on sacred music even before the 1903 motu proprio. The preparation of the Latin version, on the other hand, was the responsibility of a special Vatican department charged with producing the authentic text of papal and curial documents. And that, as we have shown, contains no reference to actuosa. If the idea of lay active participation had really originated from Pius X, such a major disciplinary change affecting the universal church would have been recorded in the Editio Typica,
Typical edition.
of the Roman Missal, which was promulgated in 1920. The accompanying decree of the Congregation of Rites, July the 25th, states that this is the edition of 1900, incorporating only those changes arising from, quote, recent liturgical prescriptions, end quote. But of course, it was not there, nor could it have been. For the participation of the laity was never the object of liturgical rubrics. Significantly, the instructions for singing during the ceremonies are directed throughout the missal exclusively at the priest celebrant and the choir, which, as we shall see in the next chapter, was precisely what Pius X had ordered in his 1903 motu proprio. It is also worth remembering that no mention of participatio actuosa by the congregation was made in the 1917 Code of Canon Law, which had been drawn up under the direction of Pius X. This was a significant omission, indicating that no change would be made to Canon 1256, which stipulated that the Church's public worship is a function of its legitimately appointed clerical ministers. Nor was any change made to Canon 818, which prohibited the addition of any liturgical arrangements not covered by the rubrics of the Missal. It will be demonstrated in Chapter 2 that no part of the original Latin document indicates that the Pope envisaged an active role for the congregation in any capacity, including sung or spoken responses. It is undeniable that the ingredient active did not derive from the Latin text itself, but nevertheless managed to serve the revolutionary agenda of the reformers throughout the 20th century and even into the present day. What is perturbing about this situation is that an expression whose revolutionary impact was felt throughout the church for decades has no properly authenticated origin.
Okay, so does the word active participation exist in the Latin official version of Pius X's first 1903 motu proprio?
No.
Does it exist in the copies of the Roman Missal that would reprint some of these quotes from that document?
No.
Does it exist in the Code of Canon Law?
No.
So some weasel put in that word. Exegesis or eisegesis? Reliance on faulty translations was never the practice in any area of ecclesiastical life before the rise of the liturgical movement. Traditionally, the Church used a method of interpretation known as exegesis, which draws out of the Latin text the meaning its author meant to convey. On the other hand, there is the method called eisegesis, eisegesis, whereby the translator introduces his own presuppositions and biases into the text by seeing what he wishes to find in it. For example, actuosa, active. This involves reading into the text what is not there. This was the preferred method of the liturgical reformers who set out to quote-unquote prove that what were really only their own subjective notions and pre-held agenda for active participation. Even today, they obsess so much about the word active that they miss the whole point of Pius X's motu proprio. So what does actuosa really mean? Michael, go on.
The first thing that strikes us is the inability of liturgical commentators to agree on what active means in the context of lay participation in the liturgy. Even in the 21st century, the search is ongoing, and the true meaning of the word has still eluded their grasp. We can conclude, therefore, that those who enacted the reforms did not, in the most literal sense of the word, know what they were talking about. That, however, did not stop them from putting their own interpretations on it. In fact, the term participatio actuosa is now considered to have myriad meanings.
Okay, so many meanings. Okay, we'll stop there and pick up next time. Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.